And it is Business Monday with a lot of big news in business in Rhode Island. A couple of things, big headline, GoLocal just broke a story about 45 minutes, an hour ago on the development of the Hasbro headquarters in Providence. It's our understanding that there's an RFP out, a number of developers submitted plans to it. The biggest plan, the most noteworthy plan is one submitted by Paolino Properties and Gilbane Development, two of the biggest players, certainly Paolino, the biggest developer in Rhode Island, excuse me, and Gilbane, one of the biggest players in the country, looking to build a headquarters at the location of where the Superman building is now located. So demoing Superman and replacing it with a corporate headquarters of a really fast-moving toy company looking to buy Mattel, according to Wall Street. What's your reaction on the early stage insights?
Well, I think it's absolutely positive. For too many years, we've not been able to do anything to redevelop the Superman building. And anyone that looks at the building and has a business plan in mind and wants a marketable facility, realizes that building needs to be raised. It hasn't been raised because of emotional, historic reasons. It hasn't been raised or hasn't been developed because there's not been anybody to bring that project to scale. So if Hasbro can bring that project to scale, and we can have a new iconic tower in downtown Providence, that has to be good. On the other hand, it's like robbing from Peter to pay Paul, because Hasbro is not a company that's located in California. It's a company located in Pawtucket,
But it might give them the space and the energy and the dynamic nature to be able to consolidate, create some energy, and bring in Mattel.
Well, more important than that, it's been long said that the economic health of the city of Providence and the state were linked. And so if you can bring into Providence a company like Hasbro to house a corporate headquarters, that certainly has to be good for the capital city. There are probably synergies that come from that. We're downtown Providence today, 2 weeks before Christmas, and it's not very hard to find a parking place. So this kind of development can be groundbreaking for the city as we go into the 21st century. But I feel for Pawtucket, Pawtucket's had a rough year. Memorial Hospital, the GAMS Theater, the conversation that we're having about Hasbro right now, the uncertainty of where the Port-Soxdale stands and how that affects downtown redevelopment for Pawtucket. So you have to recognize that, and that's also an important community. But the fact that we now have proposals, whether Hasbro comes into that facility or somebody else, that we can't develop, don't have a marketable plan to develop a prime piece of property in downtown Providence, without rebuilding for somebody else, I think is a very positive step.
Yeah, I think it's great. We all want to preserve historic opportunities, but this is a building that's been vacant going on 5 years. There's tremendous incentives in place already between federal historic tax credit, state historic tax credit, rebuild money, and boy, oh boy, if anybody had a viable project, I think they would have gotten tens of millions from the state of Rhode Island over the years. I think one of the reluctance of just not raising it willy nilly is we've been burned before. Obviously, there's supposed to be a tower down to our right here, down on Wade Bossett Street. It's a parking lot. It's been a parking lot for better than 10 or 15 years. And then the Fruit Produce Center over behind Providence Place Mall, one of the major developers in the state promised to turn that into retail, and we're 10 years later on that one, and that space is still vacant.
Oh, no question. You have to have a bird in the hand before you do anything. So people have to sign before anything is done. That's just too big a property and too important a location to start raising and end up with a parking lot for the next 25 years. That would be totally uneconomical, inefficient, and ineffective. So whether it's Hasbro or whether it's somebody else, I think it's an important recognition that that's a very valuable piece of real estate in Providence. There are synergies with the development of the entire downtown, and to the extent that a developer can come in and has a client, a business of scale, is heart-rendering good. That's positive. We'll see, though.
Well, listen, if we're talking about hundreds of jobs being produced for the construction of the new McCoy Stadium, I can only imagine what a 35 story tower would generate in economic development and energy into the city of Providence. I also think from a standpoint of what we're good at, right? What are we good at? We're good at the creative aspect of it. And Hasbro's really become a creative company. It's much more of a media company. It's not a toy manufacturer per se anymore. They handle that in Asia and contract that out. And so the opportunities are somewhat endless as to what could be produced out of it.
It's a classic case of a company not needing a manufacturing complex.
Right.
They need something quite different, and that facility could handle that.
Very exciting. So stay tuned for more on that, and we'll keep that going. Let's go down to Washington, D.C. It's tax reform season, and almost every day there's a different take on what's going on down there. And why don't you give us the latest update on where we are between the House and the Senate?
Well, there are about 17 issues. I brought them on a yellow pad, so I can list them all for you. That the House and the Senate are going to have to work out and deal with everything from differences in individual rates and brackets to the child family credit, to use of the AMT, to how the pass-through provision will work. We have a tax bill now that's going to treat what you do more important than the amount of income that you make. So if you and I are both cooks and I happen to own the restaurant,
right,
I'll pay a lower tax bill than you would.
That doesn't seem fair, Gary. What are you Republicans doing down there? You own the restaurant, I do all the work, and you get the better deal out of the. Have we cut right to the bone of why people are a little concerned about this tax reform?
I'm going to hire a lot of people to work in my restaurant. So,
no, you're not. You're going to buy another boat.
Another boat and put a restaurant on it. That's right. But the capital investments, just the way interest is deducted, the elimination of the penalty on Obamacare. So there are 17 issues. There are a lot, and there are also a lot of technical differences. One of the things that I find most interesting, the AMT was repealed by the House. It's included in a modified form in the Senate bill. But if you bring the corporate rate down 20%,
yeah,
then companies probably would be forced to use AMT and could use R&D and other types of credits. So there are a lot of technical issues and unintended consequences. But the differences between the House and the Senate are all reconcilable. And I think there are 51 votes in the Senate, and I think the president will have a Christmas present on his desk in a couple of weeks.
So let me ask you a question. Whenever there's a compromise, right, the belief is that you'll get the best. There's an equal opportunity to get the worst. Could they really blow this thing? Could they really create potentially a bill that's a deficit buster that benefits the wealthy and doesn't take care of the middle class? Are the Republicans in Congress capable of actually doing that?
Oh, they're capable. This is Alabama. The capabilities are just unbound. But there are three, issues, and any time you do something this big, you're taking risks. So the first issue is deficit issue, and I've seen projections of the deficit anywhere from $500 billion to 1.4 trillion. It's probably somewhere in between. And the argument is that how can you add to the deficit? Well, part of the issue is this, that the federal deficit when President Obama came in office was $10 trillion. It's currently $20 trillion. Now, can you reduce the deficit by cutting spending? The answer is yes, if you cut Social Security, if you cut Medicare, if you cut Medicaid, if you reduce the defense budget, and you don't pay your debt. So that's not
just that, right?
Right. So that's 90% of the budget. So we know we're not going to reduce the deficit just on the spending side, and then this becomes a little bit of a gamble by incentivizing the economy through tax programs. Can you generate growth and more revenue? And there are differences of opinion. I'm not the kind of Republican that's with the Laffer curve and believe in the supply side, and go to my grave believing in the supply side. On the other hand, there is some dynamicism that does result from tax policy changes. We know we're not going to deal with the deficit on the spending side, so it's a risk. But those are some of the numbers. There's also a risk on winners and losers.
Well, listen, one of the losers it's looking like is blue states.
Rich people in blue states.
People in blue states.
Let's be very. And I think one of the issues that will be compromised, I feel, I can't say this with certainty, is how the state local tax deductibility will be handled.
And that's a big issue for Rhode Island, I think, in a legitimate standpoint.
Well, now, there are a couple of things, and
I know, 70% don't itemize,
And-
but your rich friends down there in,
Well, I'm
in
aware-
the
I'm-
bastion, the Gold Coast that you live in, where are you, in East Greenwich? Right,
So
so
I get
there's not a lot of itemization, I mean, there's a lot of itemization going on in,
And the argument
East
is,
Greenwich.
and the argument is some of the people that are itemizing are some of the most productive people
Right.
that we have. But there are a couple of, things with it. The first $10,000 of property tax can still be deducted. Now, if you live in $1 million house, you'll have a net loss, but your standard deduction is doubling to 25,000, the first 25,000 tax-free. So each circumstance can be determined by, a lot of different things about the individual. I think you'll see a compromise. I think the compromise may say something like this, that you can deduct a capped amount, whether it's 10 or 15,000 or whatever number, from either income or property taxes, and that will help a little bit. But there is a question of, somebody is paying for it, and there's $1 trillion involved in state, local
Right.
deductibility. So some of the other things some of my rich friends like, they wouldn't get, and so there are trade-offs. But so there are different winners and losers. I mentioned the other day that if you had a family, married couple with 2 kids, and they were making 85,000, their tax bill would go from about 11,000 to a little under 9,000. So they would get a $2,400 tax relief, which happens to be 20%.
Yep.
Now, if you were making 800,000, you'd get a $25,000 tax relief. That's about 9% of what you were paying. So there are a lot of different ways to measure it. We know there are going to be winners and losers. What we were joking about earlier today about, a cook working for himself and a cook owning the company is going to be effective. For the first time, our tax code is going to look at not the amount of income, but how you're earning that income.
Right, right.
And so there are those changes, and there are going to be winners and losers. And then the third issue, and these are, I don't speak with any certainty, is will it stimulate economic growth? And there are different arguments. Some people argue that when you cut business taxes, the shareholders will buy back, stock, and there will be some of that. There's no question about that. On the other hand, if you change the pass-through formula, if you go to a territorial tax system, if you repatriate, $2.6 trillion back into the economy, that has to help. So each one of those items, you could see the glass half full, you could see the glass half empty. My response, is, what's your idea?
Yeah, yeah.
What are you proposing? It's not an $800 billion stimulus that the Obama administration proposed for so-called government-ready,
Yeah.
show-ready
Are those projects even done yet?
Those projects never existed. So maybe they're now on a planning board. So, that's the issue. There is a gamble, but
So your take is December 24th, this bill's gonna be on the president's desk?
yeah, 'cause,
And,
well, it may not be, but let me tell you what my thinking is based on. My thinking is based on is the longer it's out there, the harder it's gonna be to reach, compromise
Yeah.
and hold all the troops in line.
Does the GOP and the Senate need more to be elected?
What do you mean more? I don't understand.
In Alabama, do they need him?
Oh, well, that more, I would,
Yeah.
see, my mores are M-O-R-E, yours are M-O-R-R-E. No, I think there are 51 votes,
Okay.
without him. But we'll see tomorrow.
Absolutely. Let's jump over to the state's deficit. It's growing.
Yes.
It's looking a little more difficult. Chairman Abney was on last week with news editor Kate Nagel, and he said probably one insight was that not only has this year's shortfall grown to $60 million, but in a very nice Marvin Abney way, the guy's a complete gentleman, said, I don't think they seem to have done much in the first few months, really creating de facto a $120 million 6-month problem.
Well, we don't know because transparency is not one of their strongest suits.
Transparency, they don't, that is not a Raimondo term. That term has never been used.
It's only on money.
It's an antonym, I think, if you look it up at the source.
Just give me a check and I'll send you back what they don't need. It's more than that. And, what they've talked about of the early retirement program, I don't think that's a long-term solution to anything. But what's happened, and this is part of the problem of this and other administrations, is that we really have a champagne taste.
Yeah.
And we have a kind of a beer economy. And so, we're offering social services, Medicaid programs, infrastructure programs, all well and good, but no one's came back and said, well, what happens if we can't raise the revenue? And that's not been given serious consideration. And the problem is on the spending side. The problem is not on the revenue side. There are two things about revenue. No one's arguing that they're not paying enough taxes in the state of Rhode Island or to the state of Rhode Island. And no one is arguing that the Revenue Estimating Conference did a bad job. They missed by 1 or 2%, which is a pretty good estimate. When you're dealing with $4 billion. But there was no room for error. And it's the spending side is a lack of seriousness to exert fiscal responsibility, and it's not by cutting the state workforce or playing around with early retirement. It's really saying, what can we afford to do? And it's not a governor or a legislature saying, we don't like block grants for Medicaid because it's some kind of a Republican idea. No, block grants for Medicaid will give you flexibility to maintain the services that you think are important and really reduce Medicaid.
So when the state deficit first came out, it was for this coming year, the number was lower. You said, hey, listen, it's in the margin, right? Are we now getting into a little bit of a worry zone?
Yeah,
we've got a problem this year, which hasn't been dealt with, and we've got a growing problem next year of at least $200 and something million.
Well, think of it this way. This is the first time in a number of years that we've had a mid-year deficit in the fiscal.
A long time.
Yeah, in the fiscal year. And that really is a commentary on financial management that, you've adopted a budget, you've adopted revenue estimates, and then you're still running a deficit. Questions why? Who's watching the store? Who's managing? So that's a sea change. And also the fact that you have a $200 million projected deficit for next year, and there's not serious conversation, and there should be public conversation, and this is both on the legislature and the governor. This is not just an issue in the executive branch, because the legislature passes these budgets, and they pass them by more than 2/3. And so there's not been a serious conversation of what can the state of Rhode Island afford. And I think one thing that's pretty clear politically and economically, no one thinks we can afford massive tax increases. Well, if you can't afford massive tax increases and your revenue is not growing as fast as spending, then your options are pretty limited, and we're not having that conversation. And so when you start to look at a $200 million problem next year, which may grow to $500 million, in the out years of 21, 22, that becomes a serious problem. But it becomes even a more serious problem. It's like having pneumonia but not having lung cancer. So you can't function when you have pneumonia. You're stuck in bed. Right. You can't go to work. You can't kick butt. Do the kinds of things that you want to do because you're incapacitated. And so we've become an incapacitated state. We're not going to die. The financial situation is not going to go to somewhere in a handbasket. But because we're always fighting fires and we're always closing deficits, we can't systematically invest in the future.
So do you want to be the next governor of Rhode Island, or should everybody who's contemplating running, the 77 people who've announced and the others that are hanging back, should they all say, you know what, I'm going to wait 4 years, let Governor Raimondo clean up this mess?
Well, I won't. I'm not running. No, under no conditions would that ever happen. But if the next 4 years is as good as the last 4 years, right. I don't know.
Let's go over to commerce. We had a story today. This has been an ongoing. I think Kate Nagel's going to come on for a couple minutes on it. This developer from California, one of the leading slumlords, according to the Los Angeles Times, during the 80s and 90s and even into 2000s, and now the pathway is getting made. They put some oversight into it. He's going to get $3.6 million in development to build out some apartments. You've been there. Should there be a moral structure in how we consider who's getting state funding?
Well, let me ask you a question. If you're a business person and you're running a business and you think there are ethical and character issues, you're not going to do business. And the same is true for the people that watch our revenue. and appointing a group to, monitor the situation.
Yeah, we've got a Superior Court judge, a former legal counsel at the
It's
state
bizarre,
police.
because what Commerce is saying, you can't trust us, so we need to bring in a monitor, police.
Well, I give him some credit. I give him some credit in saying, hey, listen, Pawtucket, we've talked about Pawtucket a little bit. Pawtucket's in tough straits. Hope Artiste Building, despite the developer, is one of those little sparks of glimmer of life. If we choke this thing off, Pawtucket's all the worse off. But boy, oh boy, we need a hammer on this guy to be able to
Wait,
keep
so
him.
you're telling me that?
I'm not telling, I'm just
but
recapping.
there's $3.6 million that,
Yeah.
is needed to do the redevelopment of Pawtucket, which we
Yeah.
all support, that the best we can find is somebody,
Well, he owns it.
well, then
Swap him out.
well, there are ways to deal with those
Yeah.
kinds of situations. No, you have somebody who certainly has had a checkered, past, and I don't know if the person's been guilty or not, but if I was doing my due diligence.
He did pay $1 million fine in
Yeah.
California. He did lose his real estate license. LA Times has some more recent pieces of some problems emerging out there and some operations
See,
he's got going.
I think there's a bigger problem with Commerce, Rhode Island. This is just the tip of the iceberg. I think there are questions, and serious questions, of how they do business. How transparent is the decision-making? Are the preferential tax deals gonna produce good jobs?
Right.
Because the jobs that we're producing right now, first of all, we're lagging our competitors in growing the number of jobs. Those jobs are growing, that's positive. Our unemployment rate is low, but they're not, the jobs we're losing pay more than the jobs we're bringing in. About almost half the jobs pay less than $35,000. So are the tax deals really affecting the middle class? Are we investing in good jobs? Are we doing it transparently? And, what is the strategy? $3 million here, $20 million for hotels. There are good projects, and there are projects that may not be a priority. So I think there's a much, much more fundamental question. And it's not to be critical for a second, and be positive about, some of the things that we're doing. We're recruiting some companies, and there's a sign of an embryonic innovation cluster being created. They should get all the credit in the world for that. But there's tens of millions of dollars, being spent on preferential tax deals, and A.T. Cross didn't materialize.
Right.
And you and I talked about it at the time, and we
Right.
questioned that.
That one proved to be prophetic, I think, on your behalf.
And we're doing business with this guy in Pawtucket right now. We're putting $20 million into hotels. I go through and question is, what is the strategy? Just tell me what the strategy is. Tell me, what we should be investing in manufacturing and wholesale and apartments and hotels. And to say there are cranes in the sky when you're building apartment houses and hotels
Right.
is not quite the same as a crane in the sky if you were tearing down the Superman building and building a campus for a major corporation. They're qualitative different things, and I don't know if Monty Hall, Monty Hall would be proud because it's let's make a deal.
With that note, I want to thank the Money Man. As always, Mondays are a bastion of insights both into what's going on in the state budget and insights into Washington, D.C. I want to thank Gary Sasse. We're going to be right back at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. We're going to take just about a 20-second break. Thank you.